So please welcome our second guest, Matthew Finlayson. Matthew is a frame builder based in Glasgow who builds steel bikes under the branding Rothair Cycles. At the start of 2017, he went on a frame building course with the Bike Academy and shortly after began building his own frames from his workshop. After completing a handful of builds, he started work at Rothair Cycles in Livingston with 4 years as the fabricator and 6 months as a painter. For those of us who don't know, a fabricator does everything from preparing the tubing, cutting and fitting to brazing and welding frames. And a painter paints? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Stresses out a lot.
Okay, paint stresses a little sweat. Right, okay. You can add it to your CV. Since then, he has branched out and started his own business where he builds fully custom frames for people, and he teaches frame building classes so others can share his love for building bicycles. And as a person who knows next to nothing about building frames, I'm really looking forward to this crash course on frame building. Let's now hear from Matthew.
Thank you. So, you kind of covered my first slide for me a wee bit there. My name is Matthew Finlayson. Oops, sorry, I'll move a wee bit closer. My name's Matthew Finlayson, and I am a frame builder based in Glasgow. I build under the brand Rothair Cycles, and the first frame I made was in the Bike Academy frame building course in Frome in 2017, and I absolutely loved it. Like, every minute of it was great. I enjoyed being down in Frome. I really enjoyed starting off just with, like, here's just a pile of tubes and here's just a pile of metal, and then at the end of a week you've got yourself a frame and then you can build it up and you can ride it. Like, absolutely loved it. So when I got back up to Glasgow, I found myself a little workshop that I'm still in the East End, just a couple of minutes away from the velodrome, and moved into it. And, like, I suppose that's you, a frame builder at that moment in time, right? I picked up like a handful of files, a hacksaw, some tubing blocks, just very, very basic tools, and just kind of started hacking away, I suppose. Like, obviously I'd done the course and I kind of knew the basics of it, but like the first few frames, there was some like wild shooting from the hips. Like, it was all the frames were going to like loved ones, I suppose. Like if a frame breaks, then it's, your daddy, your brother, like, they're not going to sue you. They're never going to come after you. Like, I started making frames for, I don't know, like, friends I could live with losing, I suppose. And, like, yeah, frame builder, you know what I'm talking about. So Are you still doing that? Like, shooting from the hip with a vague level of competence, I would say. But so I made a handful of frames. At first it was quite a steep learning curve, and then Rothair Cycles, which obviously everyone here has heard of Rothair Cycles, was looking for a fabricator. There was a fabricator there called Paul, who before working at Shand, worked for Saffron, and he had moved up from London to get a job specifically in Shand, and then he fell in love with a girl from Berlin, went over to Berlin, and they had a spot open for frame builders, and I figured, like, made 5 rugged frames by this point. Like, I'm definitely not going to get a job, but I may as well fire a CV in and see how it goes. And, like, fortunately, like, Stephen was kind of happy enough to give me a job, or no one else. Maybe the other guy who'd made 4 frames, they were more rugged than mine, and I got a job in Shand, which was like an absolute blessing. Like, if I'd never got a job in Shand, like I wouldn't be sitting here just now. I wouldn't be able to teach people. Like, I've made hundreds and hundreds of frames at Shand. It was a real steep learning curve at first, but like anything, sort of practice makes perfect, you know. So I spent the first 4 years at Shand as a fabricator, working with Stuart, and then I spent the last 6 months at Shand working as the painter, which was a real stressful 6 months. And so, like, when I started as a fabricator, there was like legendary frame builder Stephen Shand I was working under. There was other people who had kind of already sort of cut their teeth, you know. And then one day, Ewan, the painter at that point, was like, right, that's it, I'm out of here. And when he handed his notice in, I kind of bullied my way into becoming the painter, like having never even picked up a painting gun before. And with Rothair, a big sort of question mark had always been, what am I going to do with paint? I always kind of wanted to move paint in-house, which means I learn how to do it, or I, employ someone. And so when the opportunity came up, I managed to get to paint, and it was real stressful. Like, I can't overemphasize how stressful that was. But when I was doing paint, all this whole time when I was at Shand, I still had Rothair. I still had my own project in the go, and Stephen was real happy for me to build under my own name. And a few employees who were there started leaving, and it was kind of obvious it was my time to leave as well. And I had tested out doing a couple of frame building lessons, which I really enjoyed, and I felt they had a wee bit of legs to them. So I figured this is kind of a good moment to leave and push my own brand, push doing frame building lessons as well. I solely build with steel. Maybe at some point I might give titanium a shot, kind of because I have the tools that you could do titanium. Aluminium doesn't really appeal to me in the slightest. Carbon doesn't really appeal to me. The process of carbon particularly doesn't really appeal to me. There's, like, steel frames, I just have a real soft spot in my heart. Like, a steel frame to me is just simply just like a round thing going into a round thing, and that aesthetic is just like, that's, like, you can't beat it. Like they're so good. I love them. So I build exclusively steel frames, and exclusively custom designed frames. There's a lot of other madness that goes along with building production frames, which doesn't really interest me too much. And I think if you're building production frames, there is a level of being real organized that I'm not 100% convinced that I have either, which you know what I'm talking about. So I only make custom frames, and to me, that kind of keeps things quite interesting. In every frame, there's like there isn't any monotony to it. You kind of have to think about what you're doing, and you have to, like you're not just you're not just cooking from a recipe, you're kind of redesigning, and you're designing something every time. That to me has a lot of appeal. And yeah, of course, I'm doing frame building lessons as well, which is, I would say, probably about a third of my business. So the process of building frames with steel, to me, has a lot of appeal. Like, not only are like steel frames quite, aesthetic, quite elegant to look at, like it's like you're chopping metal and you're cooking with fire and you're welding, and it's quite an industrial process. And the process, to me, has quite a lot of appeal. And like, steel frames are something that people have been producing for a long old time now. So there's a well-trodden path, and there's lots and lots of manufacturers who make nice tubing, make nice components. The two main tubing providers or manufacturers I use are Columbus and Reynolds, who I kind of assume that most of you guys have come across frames made out of Columbus and Reynolds tubing. As a general rule of thumb, for the most part, if I'm building you a frame that you're going to ride on the road, chances are it's going to be made out of Columbus. And if I'm making you something that you're taking off-road and you're getting radical on, there's a good chance I'm going to make it out of Reynolds. And Reynolds just make bigger, burglier tube sets, essentially. I have brought a few tubes with me, which I was going to hand out, but maybe when you get a chance later on, it's worth coming to have a look at. So if you have a wee look at the diagram in the bottom left, that is a diagram of a Columbus main tube, which I brought one of these with me today. And all of Columbus tubing, all Reynolds tubing, and any other manufacturer who is making tubes to build frames out of, make tubes with butts at either end of them. So you have, like this, I could, here for example, like let's say if this was a top tube, like you've got a nice thick section at either end, and then you get a nice thin section in the middle, where the tubes join another tube is where you're going to get more forces through them, which means it kind of needs to be stronger. But obviously, you're wanting to make things nice and light. You don't have the same forces down the centre of the tube, so they make them much thinner. And when you come and have a look at these, you can sight down the centre of the tube and pass it to yourself, and you can see the butts in them. Like Columbus made a real nice thing. So yeah, one of the benefits of making steel bikes is there are so many folk out there who are making nice components. Here we have, like Columbus will make like pre-bent stays and pre-bent chain stays. So it's all nice materials to work with. And yeah, just so many manufacturers are making nice components you can build frames out of, which means that once you put them all together, you get a nice frame, And so yeah, so you get 3 different types of frames. And what I mean by that is there's 3 different ways that you can join all of these tubes together. You get fillet braced frames, which is what this frame behind me is. You get lugged frames, which I think that might be, is that a lugged frame over there, maybe? Which I'm sure you've seen old steel steel frames with lugs on them, and you get welded frames, which Stuart's one just here. Fillet brazing is the way I learned how to build frames when I was in the frame building course. And it's a very kind of accessible method for building frames. Just you can't, like if you were wanting to make a frame that was no good to ride, or if you were wanting to, how can you describe it, sort of like get it too hot that you were to damage something, you would kind of have to go out of your way to do it. Like, it's a very, very forgiving process, and I think this is the process that most people get into to fillet brazing with. I have a wee test piece here, which one of the students in one of my courses did. Which this is the best one any of the students has done.
Where is the rest of the bike?
The rest of the bike is being ridden out in the roads as we speak, I'm sure. So what brazing is, let's see if we've got our head tube, we've got our top tube. These are both mitered together, and brazing would be melting brass round this joint, and you can think of it as metal glue. So you would melt brass round the joint, and that's what sticks the tubes together. But you have the top tube and the head tube are still separate, they're just kind of stuck together. And you can kind of see it in this diagram on the bottom left. You can see how you've got the two parent tubes, and then the brass fillet, and these still, like, they're sort of stuck together, but they don't become one material. Lugged brazing is essentially the same as fillet brazing, only rather than having a big fillet round the joint, all of the tubes are sleeved by one of these lugs, and then you could braze into the lug. And so the lug itself kind of acts like a fillet, and all of you guys have 100% seen and probably ridden old lug frames. And this is kind of like it's almost like a heritage way of building bikes. There isn't really any functional benefits you would get from it. They just look real nice, and like they just are nice. There's just something in lug bikes that warm your heart, and they are, super, super easy to build as well. So I think this is also another way that people get into building frames. Just, like you could do this in your kitchen and it's easy peasy. And the last way of building frames is welding them. And I have another test piece that you guys can come and see at some point. But welding would be if we were to butt our head tube and our top tube together, and then you melt both of the parent materials until they essentially melt together. You would also add more material at the same time, but you would add more of the same material. And essentially, if you were to weld these together, you have one thing. That make sense? Good. And you can kind of see, if you have a look at the top drawing from some student and doing an apprenticeship somewhere on the internet, you can kind of see that the weld running along it has kind of dug right into both of these materials. So that in essence is one piece now. So all of the tubes which you're building frames with, all of these Columbus tubes are, like, I would consider a tube that's 1 mil thick to be quite. If it was a tube that was 1 millimeter thick, like that's quite a thick tube. Like, what's the Reynolds range is like 0.7 millimeter thick, 0.65 if you're using like a spirit tube or something, and they are real hard to weld. It's kind of real easy to just blow holes in them, and very few people like start frame building welding. Like, very few people. I could see that would be quite a... Well, when I was learning to weld, I'd never welded before I started working in Shands, and it was very disheartening to begin with. Just all of these test pieces, you're like, there we go, that's just a mess. But practice makes perfect, right? So everything I make is custom. And that means that, or to me, that kind of means that, like, whatever you want to do on a bike, you can make a bike to do it. Wherever you're going, you can make a bike, for you to go where you're going and what you're doing. And just as an example of how custom you can make stuff, my bike, this green one behind my shoulder, this was a replacement for a bike I had. I used to call the Gentleman's Fixed, and it was a fixed gear road bike that took mudguards with touring geometry. So like it was, it wasn't like a wild fixie or like a track bike or anything. So I got rid of that, and this was a replacement I made for it. And it had a few different criteria I wanted. One of them was I wanted it to be fixed. Another one was I wanted it to have odd-ax geometry, which is just road bike geometry, essentially. I wanted it to have mudguards, but I especially wanted it to have forward-facing dropouts. And the reason for this is the last bike I had, the Gentleman's Fix, had rear exiting dropouts. And any time you had to take the wheel out to fix a puncture, or any time you had to take the wheel out to flip it, I had to undo the mudguards, take the wheel out, flip it, put it back in, redo the mudguards, and it was a nightmare, would be exaggerating, but like it was no good, So I wanted forward exiting dropouts, I wanted dynamo routing, and I wanted anything cages on the forks, which, like, of course, this is a frame that, like, this is a bike that you can't find on the shelf anywhere. So fortunately, I build custom bikes and I was able to make it for myself,
Sorry, I think you're missing one water bottle holder in your bike that you actually made, compared to what you were planning
so
to
do. There is bosses for it under there. I think every single bike I have ever made has bosses under there, and I don't think I've ever used them once. Like at some point there's going to be an emergency, and something's going to have to go there, I apologise. I promise it won't ever happen again. The program I use for designing bikes is a program called BikeCAD, which is made by a guy who lives in a forest in Canada somewhere, which means if you ever have an issue with it and you ping him a message, like, he's the guy who responds to you. I actually sent him a message one time, and there was a specific angle that I wanted from forks, and I emailed him and I was like, I can't find where this is. Am I being stupid? And he was just like, no, that's not on there, but the next update it will be. So that is my claim to fame. I designed this. So I use BikeCAD for designing all my frames, and I have two, like it's quite versatile. You can change lots and lots of things in it. But for the most part, I have it set to two different templates. One of them I call the fit and design, which is the top left one, which if I was making you a bike, these are all the numbers that it's got your saddle height, your reach, it's got your head tube angle, and just like these are how I would design a frame for you around a fit essentially. And then I have a template called the Build Master, which has all of the numbers on it I would need to build the frame essentially. The fit and design is the bike that you're going to ride, and the Build Master are all the numbers that I need. Yeah, so the process, I take all of the numbers from the fit and design, and then I print out a Build Master from these numbers. And all of the numbers on this Build Master I put into my jig, and then I make a start on cutting all of the tubes with the mill in my workshop. And it's real a simple process. I just clamp the tubes in a vise and cut them with a hole saw. And sometimes you need a wee bit of fettling with a file afterwards, but that's no problem. The first few frames I ever made was just with a hacksaw and file, and you can kind of get close. In fact, like you've possibly even ridden frames that have been made with hacksaws and files and not known. Like having like a nice jig, having like mills, having lace and stuff like that just speeds the process up essentially. And yeah, paint, which building a frame is a relatively sort of like simple process. You can sort of follow it step by step. If you get to a point where you're feeling stressed, like you can just put stuff down and then come back the next day when you're feeling fresh. Whereas paint, like paint is, I find real difficult. And it's like you don't want to put too much paint on, it's no good. If you don't put enough paint on, it's no good. Once you make a start, you kind of have to keep going until you get to certain points. And yeah, the process itself is really difficult, but what's a million times more difficult is picking colours that's nice. Which, like, there's a million different greens out there. Half of them are horrible. Half of that other half are kind of fine. The rest of them are good, and then there's a couple which are perfect. And then you take another colour, which has to then go with this colour, and picking colours is by far the hardest bit of the whole process, finding colours that match one another. So what I always do is I've kind of become obsessed just looking at cars now and what colours cars are, and if I come upon cars I like, I always write the model down. You can order paint from registration plates as well. So like often just behind cars, just writing plates down. So anyone who ever comes to me for a bike, I'm always like, start looking at cars. Like that's like picking paint myself is too much of a responsibility. I need to. And so there's all, like obviously steel rusts, and you don't want your bike to rust. And this has always been a wee bit of, not a battle, but it's always been a bit of a concern. So I've always, I put like rust inhibitor, or I have historically put rust inhibitors in frames, and anyone who ever buys a bike off of me, I've always said, like, you need to top this up fairly regularly. Up until fairly recently, I have discovered the process of ED coating. So I have started sending my frames away, and I get them dipped. So let me think how it works. It gets dipped in like a degreaser. It then gets dipped in some heinous chemical which inhibits the rust. It then gets dipped in paint, and an electronic charge is sent through the frame which causes the paint to stick to it. The way I heard it described was you can ride your bike on the bottom of the ocean for 10 years and you don't need to worry about rust. And this has, it's not only has it made my process so much easier, it has also, it's like I feel a lot more comfortable sort of sending folk out into the world with, here's a frame, it's 100% coated on the inside, rather than here's a can of stuff, I am trusting you to top this up every couple of years. So like that is, this is actually quite a recent revelation, which I'm real happy about. And the final part of what I do is I repair frames, which I suppose you've already spoken about the benefits of repairing frames. But I think like one of the other benefits of being able to repair frames is like I always think of a bicycle is quite it's like you have quite an intimate relationship with your bicycle. Like you spend like how many miles have you done this year? 20,000 or something?
Not this year. Not yet.
Or
no.
by the end of the year, you spend long periods of time on your bike, and like you kind of develop a wee bit of a relationship with it. I always think of it as, and like if something ever fails in a steel frame, just whip that tube out, stick another tube in, and you have your bike back. You can keep going and going and going. That's definitely one of the benefits of steel frames as well. And this was my last slide, so I'll move on to the. There we go. I remember that being taken.
Oh, excellent! Thank you. Actually, just one question, about repairing the frames.
Mm-hmm.
So, you said you swap the tubes. So, is there like a reverse process to brazing, or is it more brutal and you just cut them out, the ones that you don't want?
You just cut them out, pretty much. I get a few people come to me looking for modifications, like adding like IS disc tabs to old frames. But if, let's say if a frame has failed, you would just chop that out, fire a new one in, and it's not particularly elegant. It's just grinding, chopping.
Fair enough. Okay. So it's not like melting out the copper that was there in the first place.
It would.
No,
it would depend on the frame. It could potentially be possible, but for the most part, you would just cut things out.
All right. So, I'm sold on this, frame building. You make it sound very exciting. Not the painting. No, I wouldn't go for the painting. So, if someone wants to come on your frame building course, how long does it take, and what's the cost, and do I need to know anything beforehand? Do I need to buy my own arc welder? Do I need to,
No. So I have been, for the last year or so, I have been running, the last couple of years, sorry, I have been running a 5-day frame building course, which now has quite a, it's got quite a sort of set rhythm to it. Like, this is where we start, this is where we should be halfway through, this is where we are at the end. but that I charge £1,295 plus parts. But this year I have been testing out a 2-week frame building class, which is just, here's a hacksaw, here's a file, wake me up when your frame's done, kind of thing, you know. And that I think will probably be about, if I end up running it, that will probably be about 2,800. But whilst I'm testing this out, I'm doing it for 2,000 just now. And like, you don't need to know anything about frame building. You don't need anything. Like if you bring coffee in the first morning, like it'd be real good. But you don't need
and
to bring
biscuits.
anything.
Where does the name Rothair come from, and what does it mean?
Rothair is Gaelic for bicycle. I think if we were Gaelic speakers, you would say Rothair, but Rothair is how I would usually just pronounce it. Gaelic for bicycle.
So my next question is about the custom bicycles. So when people come to you and they want a bicycle frame to be built, do they usually have a clear idea what they would like, or maybe they need some guidance?
It depends. I would say probably 50-50. Some people come with, I want the frame, I want the bike to do this. I'll be going here on it. I want this colour scheme, and these are all the components I'll be running. And some people come to me with, like, I just want you to build me a bike, and which is what I prefer. Like, if someone's like, just make me something, I think that's the ideal situation. But about 50-50, I would say. It varies a wee bit.
And do you prefer teaching or doing?
It's close, but I would say I probably prefer teaching. I had a guy called Sam who did the course with me. I'd never met him before. Now, like, we ride Audax together, and like I consider him a friend of mine. I had an older guy, a semi-retired guy called Duncan, who I was a wee bit worried at first because he's very, very quiet and quite introverted. But then when he left on the last day, I was like, Duncan, I'm going to be sorry that you're not going to be in on Monday. It was like I always think. So like I spend on a frame building course, I spend 5 days with someone, and you're working real closely with someone who's obviously never ever built a frame before, and like under these sort of circumstances, you would be best friends with the devil if you were, if you were stuck with him for a week. It's like I really, really enjoy sort of getting to know folk, and I would probably have to say the frame building classes. I think.
So how many hours per day do you run the classes for?
It depends.
Depends how good the student is.
It depends how chatty the student is. Like sometimes you'll be like, listen, we've been gabbing for ages, like you need to do these practice pieces. Sometimes people sometimes people leave like at the end of the day when it's getting dark. Sometimes folk, like 5 o'clock comes, things have been quite efficient. It kind of depends. For the most, everyone has finished the frame on day 5 and walked away with the frame. But some folk have had to stay late for sure.
Has there been a build or repair that you have been particularly proud of?
I made a frame for a friend of mine maybe about 6 months after I'd been shanned for a friend of mine called Nina, who is, I can't remember exactly how tall she is, but she's maybe around about 5 foot tall. And it's quite easy to make a frame, or it's quite easy to sort of design a frame for a tall person or sort of like regular sized person, but for shorter people, like obviously like the reach of a bike kind of gets shorter and like your wheels get closer together and everything just sort of like yeah, it's like making really, really small bikes is quite difficult. So there was a wee bit of, not so much shooting from the hip when I was building it, but there was a wee bit of shooting from the hip when I was designing it. And when I was handing it over, I kind of had a wee spiel in the back of my head, which was like, Nina, it's okay, we can fix this can be done again. But it was the first frame I'd made after I started to feel I was getting competent at Shand. And it was the first frame where I was like, a frame builder made this. It wasn't just some guy with hacksaws and files in the East End of Glasgow. This was made by someone who knows what they were doing. And I don't know, I always consider that bike is still 5% mine, or 2% mine, or whatever. There's still like it's still a wee bit mine. That's always a frame that, like, if I can't sleep, I'm like, I remember that frame I made for Nina. that was my highest point in frame building, I would say. Like, I really think about it all the time. Yeah.
Ruby, do you need a new bike? Because maybe don't we need
Actually, Stu, you really nice tiny bike.
Sorry,
That would
Matthew.
make Stuart's happy.
All right, we'll take some questions from the audience now.
Probably asking for a lot of people here, how long does it take for you to make a bike for one of us? Thanks.
I usually say to people, thanks for giving me your deposit, you will have a frame in a month. Is usually, and that kind of gives me a wee bit of time to get things painted. I think that will probably extend a wee bit now that I'm getting frames e-coated. Sometimes it takes a couple of weeks for them to get shipped back to me. Building a frame, you could do in 3 to 5 days, something like that, I would say it takes. But like, let's say, if I were to build you, let's say from taking your order to here you go, a month is usually what I shoot for. I do run over a wee bit sometimes.
You had that box full of parts, and some of them were like pre-formed curved tubes. How much do you manipulate those in a custom way yourself, or are they always kind of off the shelf?
It depends. So I used to occasionally, I would add additional radius to seat stays. Up until recently, so this is a Columbus mountain bike bend seat stay, and sometimes that radius is not quite enough, but I've actually found a company called Dada have now make a seat stay where that radius is much, much tighter, which since I discovered that tube, like very, very rarely. I dimple quite a lot of chainstays in order to generate crank clearance, but apart from that, not really too much.
Can I ask about the frame building course? Which technique or techniques do you teach on your frame building course? And also, how long is the waiting list to get onto one of your courses?
See, I think I could squeeze you in August, I'm sure. So all of the frame building courses I've done have been fillet brazed frames. A few people have done a fork building course with me where they have brazed a fork crown the way you would make a lug, which is capillary brazing. If you wanted to make a lug frame, that would be no problem. I suppose if you had welded in the past, and if your welding was hot, that would maybe be okay. But just fillet brazing or with making frames with lugs, I would say.
Hi, Matt. Oh, sorry. I'm going to be cheeky and ask 2 questions. My first question is, for the lessons, do you do groups or like pairs so that 2 people come at once? And would you consider doing painting lessons? Even though you hate it, someone else might love it.
Maybe, but like the language gets real coarse when you're playing it. I get real uncomfortable with some of the terrible language. I don't have the facilities to do frame building classes with pairs just now, but people ask me about that semi-regularly, so I think I'm going to try and address that when I can afford it, I suppose. I have been keen to test out a group brazing class where you make like a keyring or something, but I've not really. That's kind of in the back of my mind, kind of thing. I think I'll try that at some point. I've just not gone ahead and done it yet.
We could make that happen.
And I could live for that.
Hi Matt. You mentioned a lot of the really nice components and the tube sets and so on that are made by all these wonderful companies. If I could ask 2 questions. The first is, what is your favourite piece of bike that you can assemble that someone makes? And second question, what's something that hasn't been made yet that needs to be made?
Interesting. So, my favourite single component is a Columbus externally butted seat tube, which, obviously, Rich did the frame building course with me at one point, and I wouldn't be surprised if at one point in the course you were like, Matty, you need to shut up about that seat tube. This is by far, that's on this, it's on Stuart's bike. Most frames I build with a 27.2 seat tube. Seat post, sorry. I would put one of these on it. A debate myself and Stuart when we were at Shand used to have quite a lot was he would always say that the seat stays going into the back of your top tube cluster here from behind. He reckons that's his favourite bit. But for me, chain stays going into a bottom bracket is just, any time I look at a bike in any shop now, my eyes just go down there. And I'm like, oh, how have you done this? How have you got around this? There's just that wee cluster where everything's happening is. And someone said hover bike was what needs to be made. It seems like a hard answer to beat, I suppose.
As you said, people have been making steel bikes for a long time and using a whole bunch of different methods to do it. And the bike's design has changed a lot over the years, and it's been a lot of progression. 2 questions. Question 1, if you could travel back in time, or possibly forward, but let's say back in time, to any bike factory or scene in existence, which one would you go back to go and work in? Where would you want to go? Question 2. Frame builders often make bikes that are unviable for big companies to make. They often make things that may be a bit weird or out there. What do you see from frame building that's something that the wider bike world will jump on next?
Hopefully the wider bike world will jump on board the fixed gear Audax forward exit and drop out a super skidder. So like I know that like it was like I suppose gravel bikes kind of came off the back of frame building a wee bit. Just like there's always been lots and lots of small frame building operations where you can like you don't really need to be able to predict trends. You're just like, I've got an idea, I'm just going to make this. And I know that guys like Stephen and the boys at Shands are like, people want, you know, road bikes with fat tyres, which was essentially all the gravel bike is. And I know that the gravel kind of came off of the back of that, I suppose. As for who I would like to work with, I don't know, like, I feel like I would love to have worked at Shand a few years earlier than I did. I would like to have been part of so when I joined Shand, there was like the build process had kind of already been put in place. It would have been nice to have been part of that whilst it was evolving. But like to answer your question, like I've already worked in that place, you know. It was like it truly was absolute blessing. Like I'm so unbelievably lucky to have got a job at Shand, for sure.
Hi.
Hey.
Do you ever worry that you'll create competition for yourself and you'll just teach everyone to build frames and then they won't need you anymore?
I think what's a rising tide lifts all ships. Like the more people building frames, like the merrier, like the better it is for everyone. It's like the more bikes, like bikes equal fun. More bikes equals more fun, right? Yeah, no, like absolutely not. I think more people building frames, like more power to them. I think it's great.
How many bosses are too many bosses?
How many bosses are too many bosses? That is true. There's too many bosses on the underside of your cycle truck, for sure. Definitely, like some people come to me with, they're like, cool, I want a bike that will do everything, and how about we put bosses here, and how about we do, how about we put some, it would be good if I could carry a bottle cage on the underside of a cheat stay. Sort of thing. You're like, no, you need to rein this madness in a little bit. So like, there definitely is the potential for too many bosses, for sure. Like sometimes you need to rein people's madness in. You're like, just get a little.
Never forget bosses on the back of the head shoe.
Yeah. I'm sure when that was being made, I was saying things like, "There's a lot of bosses. Are we sure about this?" Yeah.
So if there is any more questions, please feel free to come and ask Matthew and come and see all the parts that he brought with him. So thanks, Matthew, again. It was fantastic.